Hey, why don't we go ahead and get started? So, hello everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I am Meg Bouvier. You probably know me from your library of virtual NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as both an applicant, a researcher, and now as a full-time grant mentor. And I've helped my clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you are attending live, just a reminder that you are in listen-only mode, and like me, you're probably trying to get a handle on the new Zoom platform and all the new functionality that's there. So you'll see at the bottom there's a place for Q&A and chat. Those are two functions that have not changed, thank goodness. So feel free to load up the Q&A box with questions. I do not have a guest or a tutorial today. This is strictly Q&A. I try to reserve the intensive grant writing months for just Q&A. So all of September will be Q&A for those writing for the October and November deadlines. What you should be viewing in the library now, well, we're getting pretty close to the end. So I would hope that you're done looking at your courses. Maybe you're watching something like, just going over some of the checklists for chapter 4 and Master the R series. Or maybe you're an early bird and starting to prep for February. If so, good for you. That's great. The more time you give yourself, the better. So if you fall into that category, then you would probably be watching preparation, chapter 1. So any NIH updates, of course, we have the new scoring criteria coming out. This is going to be the last grant cycle under the old scoring criteria. So as we move into October, the first Ask the Grant Writing Expert session in October is going to be devoted to the changes in scoring criteria. Also, just a reminder to people that I'm implementing a new service. It's called First Fridays, and not surprisingly, it will be on the first Friday of every month, mostly so that I can remember what it is. So First Fridays will be on the first Friday of every month. So that we're going to launch this Friday, September 6th. It is going to be at 11:30 Eastern time, and it's going to be somewhat like this, but even more casual. I'm not going to record it. I'm not going to have guests. I won't have any mini tutorials. It's going to be like office hours. People can come and just ask me questions. And if people don't ask questions, I'm just going to work just as I would during office hours. So I am anticipating that it's going to be a smaller group, and we'll probably, rather than have people type questions, they're probably going to be able to speak, and we'll be able to, have a real consultation. So if that interests any of you, feel free to register. If you don't have the registration information for that and you'd really like to attend, please put your name in the chat box and we'll send you information. Riley can grab your email address and we'll send you information about registering. So again, it's going to be this Friday, September 6th at 11:30 Eastern. Was there anything else I needed to tell you? Oh, right. And we're also accepting registrations for the next live stream boot camp, which will be I gotta look that one up too. So we're going to be doing a live stream boot camp of Master the R series, and that is going to begin on October 17th. So that'll be, the classic 4-part Master the R series boot camp. For those who have not attended, we usually Master the R series is broken into 4 chapters, and I do 1 chapter a week. That way people can go back, they can look at the recording, they can work through the task list so that you can treat it as homework. And then as you run into problems with whatever you're attempting to do, contact the PO or write your Ames page or whatever, you can come back the following week and ask questions about it. The fall boot camp is a little different than the other ones in that we also offer a K session for those who are writing K applications. So on October 10th, we'll be doing a session specifically for the K applicants on how to write the candidate section. So I think a few of you have already registered. I don't think that email has gone out yet. So if you haven't registered and you're thinking, what boot camp? Don't worry, the email is coming. There's information about how to register within your learning management system where your courses are, but you'll get the highlights email that'll have a link to register as well. Or again, if you want us to register you, just pop your name in the chat box and we're happy to do that for you. Alrighty, so let's see. I'm happy to see that we have some questions loaded up here already. And I did get a couple of questions sent to me during the week. So let's see. Let's start with the live questions. I always like to prioritize the people who are actually attending. Okay, I wonder if it is possible to indicate the preferred study section when submitting a grant. I have some experience before where my grant was assigned to a study section that was not very relevant and the grant was not properly reviewed. So any advice to avoid this from happening in the future would be helpful. Thanks. So yes, that is something that you do in a form called the assignment request form, which is a 2-page form that is part of your form set. In the past, people used to make study section requests in the cover letter. So sometimes when you're dealing with somebody who hasn't submitted in a while, or like a mentor who hasn't submitted in a number of years, they'll say, oh, you're supposed to make that request in the cover letter. Not anymore. Don't do that. So Center for Scientific Review will not be looking for those requests in the cover letter. They look for them in the assignment request form. So the assignment request form in its current iteration, you can make a prioritized request. I think you have a first and second selection, like my first choice would be this and my second choice would be this. And there's an open response where you can provide your rationale for why you're asking for that selection. You don't have to fill that out. You could just leave that blank. Sometimes people fill that out if they make a request and they keep getting sent to the wrong study section. Sometimes they'll fill out that open response about, why does it keep going to the wrong study section? You can provide the rationale for the one you're selecting. Keep in mind that even making a request in the assignment request form, you're not guaranteed that you're going to get the one that you're requesting, but you're much more likely to get it if you actually request it than if you make no request at all. So I'm guessing from this person's question that they were not aware of the assignment request form. So just make sure that you look for that 2-page document and make your requests there. Okay, is there such a thing as including too many co-investigators? Same goes for consultants or collaborators on a grant. If so, what number? This is more specifically for the DoD, but curious about this in general. Okay, so I can't speak to DoD because I don't work on those, but I can say at NIH, this is it's not like there's a magic number, like you should never include more than this many team members. This is going to be driven by expertise and budget. So you want to include enough team members that the required expertise to execute the project properly is included in the team without duplication of effort. So when at all possible, you don't want two team members to have the same expertise. That can get a little tricky because I've seen instances, for example, where a reviewer has said, like let's say you have two PIs, multi-PI plan, and one of them is being brought on the grant because they have expertise in something specific and they're going to oversee like AIM-2 project or whatever it is. But meanwhile, you're also bringing on a co-investigator to deal with some other aspect of the project. And that PI also happens to have some expertise in that area. I've seen a reviewer say, oh, duplication of effort, that's bloating the budget, because of course, percent effort is tied to compensation, right? So you're paying people to be on the team. And if you're duplicating effort, it's seen as bloating the budget unnecessarily. So the number of people you want to include on the team are you want to make sure that whatever expertise is required to successfully complete the project is represented on the team without duplication of effort, and that the percent effort you're requesting for that person is commensurate with what they're going to be asked to do. So that's the answer. It's tied to percent effort and what is expected on that project. So, I've and it's a really good question because this is something that comes up on summary statements all the time. And again, I probably read, I don't know, 60 or 80 summary statements a year. I'm sure though many people on this attendee list are in pre-award support offices. You guys are in the same position. You read lots of summary statements a year, and it is not at all uncommon for reviewers to comment on either, this expertise is missing from your team, or this expertise is duplicated on your team and that's seen as bloating the budget, or a person's percent effort is either too large or too small based on what it is you're asking them to do. These sorts of comments come up a lot, so it's a really good question, and it's very specific to your team, your scope of work. And it's a case where you want to have other sets of eyes on that, rather than like just you or you and one other person. You want to make sure that mentors are looking at that to make sure it's appropriate. I hope that was a long answer. I hope that answered your question. Okay, let's see. The next one is, though R21s are supposed to support exploratory developmental work, in reality, how innovative do you actually think it is for the funded projects? Any tips to sell next logical steps work as an R21 to gain the additional funding over an R03 when a PI is not quite ready for an R01? This is a great question, Meredith. And actually, I was going to talk, one of the questions I had during the week was about the Trailblazer R21. So I was going to bring this up. So I will discuss this within the context of R21s in general and the Trailblazer R21 and R03s, and like how experimental are these things supposed to be. So for those of us who have been doing this a long time, we remember years and years and years ago, many, if not most, institutes participated in the parent R21. And over time, there was a drift away from the original intent of the R21, which was for something that was a new direction, experimental, exploratory. In theory, that's the difference, right, between an R21 and an R03. So if you don't have enough preliminary data for an R01, your options are the small format Rs, the R03, which tends to be a little bit more conservative and a lower budget. They're both 2 years, but the R03, typically the budget is 200,000 K directs over the life of the grant. And for the R21, with exceptions, it's usually 275K indirects. So over time, a lot of institutes began to pull out of the parent R21. And in having conversations with program officers, because a lot of people I postdoced with are now program officers, they explained that the institute felt like there was drift, and like if you're participating in a parent announcement, you don't have control really over the intent of the NOFO, right? You're just participating in the parent. So many institutes began to pull out of the parent R21 because they felt like it was being used as like an R03 or a mini R01. There was the complaint that people were using it like a mini R01, and it wasn't really exploratory, experimental, innovative, that kind of thing. So many institutes sponsor their own R21 now. So if you look at the parent R21, you'll see that the list of institutes that participate has gotten quite small, especially as a function of time. It's really shortened up. But many of those institutes sponsor their own R21. So if you're interested in an R21, you should look and see if they sponsor their own. Sometimes the institute will be really picky about making sure that it really is innovative. Having said that, it is rare that you, despite what the NOFO says, it is rare that you aren't expected to have some preliminary data on an R21. I've seen many, like dozens upon dozens upon dozens of R21s that were not funded because they didn't have enough preliminary data. I know of one instance where the reviewers complained that it had too much. One instance. So, having said that, there are things like the Trailblazer R21. So that is something that I was asked about this week. It is the participating institutes are NIBIB, NEI, and Aging are the three that participate in it. And it truly is meant to be an experimental R21. There are experimental R, there are a number of experimental R1s like the cats where you can't have preliminary data, but I don't know, and like the DP2 and the DP5, where it's really meant to be outside the box. I don't know many small format versions of that. The Trailblazer is one of them. That really is meant to be like, you don't have to have any data at all. And they really mean it. Like you can have zero data. This can be much more outside the box, as the name indicates. But in my experience, for most institutes, for most study sections, the R21 is still a fairly conservative mechanism compared to like foundations, for example, where sometimes they really want things that are wildly outside the box. So I hope I answered your question. I know I went off on a long tangent there. Let's see. How innovative do you think it actually is? Yeah. So the parent R21, I think is a pretty conservative mechanism. Of course, NIH is always criticized for funding next logical steps research. And the reason for that is that they don't gamble with taxpayer dollars. Um, a lot of other federal agencies are a little more they're willing to fund things that are a little more juicy. I don't know if you guys remember. I had a friend on, Emily Clemens, who is a former program officer from the Army portfolio, the CDMRP portfolio, and they actually want things that are really innovative. So some federal agencies are a little more, they'll fund things that are a little more outside the box and innovative. NIH doesn't have that reputation. And there are not a lot of mechanisms where they do fund that. The high risk, high reward, the four mechanisms in that, the CATS, the Trailblazer R21, but mostly innovative is in quotes when you're dealing with NIH. Innovative is a relative concept at NIH. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, let's see. I am a clinical fellow, MD only, and planning to apply for a K grant. I saw on your beautiful videos that candidates should have multiple first author paper and also first papers with primary mentor of K. May this suggestion be different between MD and PhD, MD, PhD? As a clinician, I don't really have multiple first author paper. Could you comment on that paper background for K grants? Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to comment on that, and thank you for the compliment on the K videos. This can vary by study section and institute. So I would imagine that it would vary by how much time you've been doing research as well. So you bring up a good point that if you've been very entrenched in the clinical world, then probably the requirement is going to be lower. I can't remember an instance where I've seen even like a K08 funded where the applicant didn't have a first author publication with their mentor in the field in which they were putting in the application. It feels counterintuitive because it is, after all, a career development award. Like you're asking for mentoring in this area. So you're saying like, I don't have enough mentoring in this. But having said that, I can't think of an instance where they didn't have at least one where they were first author and typically their primary mentor is last author in the field in which they're proposing that they need mentoring, at least in some fashion or another, but maybe not multiple. This is probably a good question for your program officer. And depending on how much ESI time you have left, if you have scads of ESI time, remember that as a clinician, the ESI clock begins at the end of your clinical training. So whenever like your last clinical fellowship was, that's when that ended, that's when your ESI clock starts, so that they're really capturing 10 years of dedicated research that you're doing. If you have scads of ESI time left, put in the application and see how they react to it. like you could just do it that way. Remember that you can update publication information via the post-submission material mechanism. Okay, so hopefully that answered that question. Okay, another K question. If mentored K-level awards, how do expectations regarding the expertise level of the mentor, co-mentor change for program announcements that include a clinical trial versus ones that don't? For example, for a traditional KOA grant, I imagine you'd want senior laboratory investigators with subject matter expertise as the mentors. However, for the PAs that are clinical trial required, is it more favorable for one of the mentors to be a clinical investigator without a lab who may have not trained K-level? Oh, without a lab. Oh, you had me going there until you got to that phrase. I do think that if you are proposing to train as a clinician scientist, so you are a clinician who is proposing to train as a clinician scientist, at least one of your mentors must be a clinician scientist. I don't know that it's helpful for you to have a clinician who doesn't have a lab. My impression from reading summary statements for like KOA, K23 type mechanisms is that reviewers really understand that. Let me back up. People who are clinicians who apply for career development awards are often will have their primary mentor be a PhD level person, particularly if they're an MD and if they themselves are an MD and did not get a PhD. They're hungry for that kind of bench science training, and their primary mentor is often a bench scientist type person, a PhD level person. Having said that, if you are proposing to train to become a clinician scientist where you in the future plan to see patients and do research, at least one of your mentors should be living that life right now, in my opinion. Because I think over the years, the impression that I've gotten kind of across institutes and study sections is that reviewers understand that that's a very unique juggle, that learning to juggle seeing patients and running research is not something a PhD can teach you. It's something, and it's not something a clinician only can teach you. The only person who can really teach you how to do that challenging juggle is somebody who's doing it. So it doesn't have to be your primary mentor, but I would say maybe a co-mentor should be a clinician scientist, not a clinician without a lab, but preferably a clinician scientist. Okay, hopefully I answered that. If we submit, did I do that one? Yeah. If we submit an R01 and the review is not favorable, will it affect our chances with future R01 submissions? Should we wait until we are fully prepared before submitting, or is it worthwhile to submit and try anyway? These are great questions. And these are the fundamental questions, right? So I would say that you want to submit when you're fully prepared and when you have addressed all the comments. So I assume that you're talking about an A1, because if you submit an A1 and it's not funded, you're resubmitting as an A0, right? And then your reviewers will have no knowledge unless it's the same study section and they remember. They won't be given previous summary statements or applications. It's like a de novo application to that group. So I'm assuming we're talking about an A1 where reviewers will actually be able to look at the previous set of summary statement. So will it affect your chances of funding? Well, I mean, statistically, yes, right? Like, I mean, statistically at NIH, if something was triaged as an A0, its chances of funding on the next round are lower than if something like received a percentile score of like 20%, But remember that that doesn't describe necessarily what will happen on a specific application, right? So you could have been triaged on an A0 and then you wait and you dutifully write up everything you need and to address the reviewer comments, and then you put in a resubmission and the reviewers are really impressed with what you've done in the interim. And you might be funded. That happens too. So I always advise people to wait to submit until they can really respond to everything in the reviewer comments, unless you have a compelling strategy reason not to do that. Like um, you're trying to time your submissions um, so that you're maximizing your ESI funding advantage, for example, so like maybe you're trying to get that resubmission in quickly so that you'll have time to squeeze in an A0 while you still have ESI status. Like unless there's a strategy reason, or like you're coming up for tenure and you have to show that you're submitting and it's, like you have to get it in. All else being equal, I would say don't resubmit until you can really respond to the reviewer comments that you think are fair. The ones that you really like, I really feel like we should respond to that kind of thing. If something is like off the wall, like I've seen reviewers say, you should get a master's degree, and the person's like, I'm not getting a master's degree. Like if it's something off the wall, don't worry about it, but try to respond as best you can. All right. Let me just look in the chat. Um, okay, so there's a registration link for boot camp in the chat, just in case people are looking for how to do that. And I'm going to try to answer what questions I can. So we do have a bunch. I'm probably going to wind up staying on late, which you're welcome to stay or not. But I have two fun questions about do's and don'ts of letters of support. Should I submit a letter of support from the senior research admin in our college, the dean of medicine in our institution endorsing the study? Senior investigator number one on my team wants to. Senior investigator number two says don't bother unless they're providing specific services for the study. I mean, you don't need to. You definitely don't need to do that. I probably wouldn't, but having said that, there are people who are really gung-ho on submitting extra letters of intent. I kind of go with what the person says, don't bother unless they're providing specific services for the study. Yeah, I think reviewers would find that a bit of a head scratcher, but it's not going to hurt. I mean, it's not going to hurt your chances to do it. Senior investigator number two says he will provide a letter of support because he's sharing his lab to support my R01. Investigator number one and project manager disagree. Oh dear, Janet, you have a lot of opinions floating around here. Co-Is do not provide letters of support. Do or don't. Yeah, that person should provide a biosketch, and they should say in the personal statement of their biosketch everything they would have said in the letter of support. So they don't need to, you know, key personnel submit letters of biosketches, not letters of support, or whatever they would put in the letter of support, they should put in the personal statement of their biosketch. Hope I didn't cause any more fights there. It sounds like you have a lot of opinions floating around. If we want to start writing an R01 for this cycle, October 5th, yikes, how could you help us? Do we need to send you the material a few weeks ahead of the submission? I have no idea what organization you're working for, but I can tell you I am booked 2 years out for one-on-one support. Like it's September 4th. Like I could help you on a grant application for September 4th, 2026. So, and I don't even know if your organization has a membership to that service. We're not taking new clients in that service because I'm so backlogged on one-on-one support. So I would suggest that you watch Master the R series, which will walk you through, it'll really hold your hand through the writing of an R01 submission. But I'm not taking new clients for October 5th. If my assistant were here, she'd be chuckling about that. If a proposal has been submitted and revised 5 times and got discussed once, do you think that I should drop the idea altogether? I tried different study sections and addressed all the comments that made sense before every resubmission. I also spoke to the PO and took his advice, but it seems I'm going nowhere. I'm super excited about the work, but it seems no one else is. What is your advice? Wow, that's a tough one. I would speak to some colleagues and consider other agencies and foundations. It may be also look in the reporter website and see like maybe NIH doesn't fund the kind of work that you're doing. But I would look outside of NIH and consider foundation funding and other federal agencies, because that's a tough track record. If you're not getting traction like that, and try different study sections, that's tough. With regard to post-submission materials, many mechanisms now seem to say they'll only accept preliminary data. Sorry, I'm being very concrete here. Can you describe in detail how you would submit manuscript? So this is a two-parter. Um, Many mechanisms now seem to say they'll only accept preliminary data. So that's not true. The post-submission material policy at NIH, the core policy has not changed. So post-submission material was, is, and probably always will be a mechanism by which, for example, you update publication information and you update, you not update, but upload a video. It's the only way to submit a video with your application. So that has never changed. That's always been the case. What is new is that during the pandemic, any mechanism that allowed preliminary data in the grant application was accepting preliminary data as post-submission material. In May of last year, when the state of emergency ended, the federal state of emergency for the pandemic, NIH codified this so that specific mechanisms will continue to allow preliminary data as post-submission material. And I think it's the R01 and I want to say the R21, but it has to be, and I'm almost positive it's not the K. It has to be a mechanism that allows preliminary data in the mechanism. So just to clarify that, can you describe in detail how you would submit manuscripts that have been accepted for publication between submission and study section given those instructions? So speak to your pre-award support office about how to do this, but up until 30 days before the study section meets, I don't think there's a form for this. I think it's literally just you write out a single page that you can submit once in that window of time after upload and 30 days before the study section meets. I think it's like a free form. You can write, the information on there. But I've never been involved in that because every organization has different ways of different platforms that help them upload information to grants.gov. So ask your pre-award support office to help with this. Okay, I know we're going over. I still have two more questions and they're short. Oh, one more question. Actually, Riley, can you grab, there's a person in the Q&A that's asking to be registered for boot camp. We'll grab your email, but just so you know, the boot camp registration link is in the chat. So the person who put that in the Q&A, you can just click on that link in the chat. And then the last question, could you please clarify what is an A1 versus an A0? An A0 is a new submission, so it's an R01 new submission. If that doesn't get funded and you resubmit, then it's an A1. If the A1 doesn't get funded and you want to put the application in again in some version, like retool it, beef it up, add more data, improve it in whatever way, and put it in again, it has to go in as an A0. So the third submission has to be an A0. That's the current policy at NIH. It has to be an A0. And, the expectation is that you've improved it in some way. This is somebody asking for the calendar series for First Fridays, not the boot camp. I'm not sure what you mean, the calendar series. It's going to be the first Friday of every month at 11:30 Eastern. And I think you are registered, Janet, if I remember correctly. So just first Friday of every month at 11:30 Eastern, drop in. So, okay, guys, we're way over time. So, and I was worried that y'all weren't going to have any questions for me. I didn't even get to the questions that were emailed to me ahead of time. So thank you. You make my job easy. It's a lot of fun to just have questions fired at me. So I know it sounds crazy, but I actually do enjoy it. So thank you guys so much for your interest and best of luck with your grant writing. And I'll see some of you on Friday, I hope, and I'll see the rest of you next Wednesday. So good luck with your grant writing. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.